President Trump pausing many of the tariffs on imports from Mexico and Canada for a month. But bigger tariffs are still set to hit in just a few weeks. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao brings us the latest.
And President Trump on Thursday paused his 25% new tariffs on goods coming in from Mexico and Canada that are covered by USMCA, a free trade agreement that he negotiated during his first term among the three North American nations. And Trump signing the new executive action says the 1-month delay is to protect American car makers, but he also warns that across the board reciprocal tariffs will still kick in on April 2nd.
April 2nd is a little bit different. That will be much more significant, but during this interim period between now and April 2nd, this makes it much more favorable for our American car manufacturers.
Trump on Wednesday just paused auto tariffs on Mexico and Canada at the request of the big three automakers. The White House says the delay is to encourage the companies to move their supply chains to the U.S.
Where they will pay no tariff. That's the ultimate goal.
The now expanded pause comes as Trump talked to the Mexican leader today.
And they've been working much harder lately. Do you notice that? On people coming in and drugs.
But Trump, after talking to Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau yesterday, says he's still not happy with Canada's work on fighting fentanyl. Meanwhile, as stocks slide amid the new tariffs this week, Trump says he's not looking at the markets at all when making changes.
Countries and companies that have been ripping us aren't particularly happy with what I'm doing. But the United States will be very happy.
While more goods are now exempt at least for a month, some goods are not covered by USMCA. More than 60% of goods coming in from Canada and more than 50% of goods coming in from Mexico are still facing Trump's new tariffs. Reporting by Iris Tao, NTD News.
And U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, earlier today at the White House, sharing the latest developments between the United States and the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, as well as a possible peace deal between Ukraine and Russia. NTD correspondent Jason Blair joins us now live from Washington, D.C. Jason, after the tense meeting between President Trump and Zelensky last week, how are things looking now?
Hey, Steve. Yeah, so Steve Witkoff did talk about that. He says he thinks things are heading in a good direction. He said that Zelensky did apologize and that Witkoff is currently in talks with Ukraine. Now, he said that next week, actually, U.S. and Ukrainian officials will be meeting in Saudi Arabia. Here's him talking about that earlier today at the White House.
President Zelensky sent a letter to the president. I think the president thought that it was a really good, positive first step. And from that, we're now in discussions to coordinate a meeting with the Ukrainians. But it will be Saudi Arabia. And I think the idea is to get down a framework for a peace agreement and an initial ceasefire as well.
And Mr. Witkoff said that President Trump says that there looks to be a path back and that ultimately he wants a good outcome for this, which ultimately would be peace.
And Jason, what about the ongoing conflict in Gaza? Did Steve Witkoff give any updates on the Hamas hostage situation?
Yeah, Mr. Witkoff was asked about President Trump's last warning message he sent to Hamas, asking for the rest of the hostages to be returned. And basically, Witkoff said he didn't want to put words in the president's mouth, but according to him, he thinks that President Trump has basically reached his tolerance limit, especially following a meeting with some of the released hostages that he met with in the Oval Office on Wednesday. And here's what Witkoff had to say about that.
I think it's fairly clear he was saying, I've had enough. Like, there's a lot of mistreatment. There's a lot of conversation among these hostages about the deprivation that they went through, about murders that they saw. And I think that the president listened to it, absorbed it, and said, it's unacceptable. I'm not going to tolerate this type of behavior.
So this is regarding President Trump's very strong message to Hamas, demanding for the rest of the hostages and bodies to be released, or, quote, it's over for you. Now, Hamas did respond, saying that they will not be releasing any more hostages unless there is a lasting ceasefire. Back to you.
Jason, President Trump also gave updates from the Oval Office earlier today from the White House. What were some of the key points that he raised?
Yeah, sure. So President Trump was at the White House. He signed some executive orders. Some things that came out of that, he talked to reporters afterwards. He said that moving forward, cabinet officials will be meeting with DOJ twice a month. That is until the administration's efforts are done in that area. And then another highlight, he did sign a declaration making March of this year Women's History Month. And then I do have a clip from that when he signed earlier today. Have a look.
Proclamation that proclaims March 2025 as Women's History Month in honor of all the wonderful women in your administration, all the wonderful women in America, and in honor of everything you've done for women and this administration has done for women in just, what, a month and a half? So.
Yeah, we've done a lot. And women have done a lot for us, right? This is an honor.
And another interesting update that came from today, Steve, is President Trump was asked why there wasn't a whole lot of information released on the suspects in the 2 assassination attempts against him last year. President Trump actually said he's expecting a report to be released to him at least next week, and he does want to release it to the public. However, at this time, there is not any promises yet until it's been reviewed. Back to you.
Jason Blair, live in Washington. Thank you, Jason. The State Department holding its first briefing today, highlighting the Trump administration's efforts to counter the CCP, wipe out Hamas, and work toward a peace deal in the Russia-Ukraine war. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has key takeaways.
If the president and the secretary believe that President Zelensky is serious and that we can move forward, they have stated, in fact, that we would.
State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce discussing the fallout of the Ukraine peace deal at the first State Department press briefing of the new administration. She says if Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky is serious about finding a solution, then peace talks will resume.
We want to help him. We want to help Ukraine. We have been the biggest supporters of Ukraine in this conflict than anyone else in the world.
And now it looks like things are moving forward. Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff said Thursday that U.S. and Ukrainian officials will hold peace talks next week in Saudi Arabia. This week, the U.S. paused intelligence sharing and aid in the form of cash and military aid to Ukraine to see if the aid is working toward a solution rather than extending the war. The U.S. has sent at least $175 billion in aid to Ukraine since the war broke out in 2022. The pause comes after the notorious argument between Ukrainian President Zelensky and President Trump and Vice President Vance.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III.
Meanwhile, European Union leaders are meeting in Brussels on talks to support Ukraine, with France saying that it's open to extending its nuclear arsenal to its allies in Europe, which many European countries are very fond of. Bruce also spoke about bringing an end to Hamas control in Gaza. And Bruce said that as long as Hamas exists, there's no way forward.
It was the conveyance of the existing American position about Hamas and how it cannot exist in Gaza.
And of note, Bruce is calling the Chinese regime the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, rather than the People's Republic of China, a change from the last administration.
Already the Secretary has achieved concrete deliverables to combat transnational crime, advance the cause of enduring peace, and counter the malign influence of the Chinese Communist Party.
The State Department also recently removed a line from its website that says that the U.S. does not support Taiwan's independence. The CCP sees the independently democratic island of Taiwan as its own, despite having never ruled the territory. Now, these moves reflect a change in tone on the U.S.-China relationship. Jack Bradley, NTD News.
President Trump today pausing his wide-ranging tariffs set to go on Canada and Mexico. The 25% duties are now on hold until April the 2nd. But notably, the administration's tariffs on China are staying in place. To discuss these implications, we're joined by Javier Palomarez, founder and CEO of the U.S. Hispanic Business Council. Javier Palomarez, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
It's great to have you back with us. Javier, President Trump postponing 25% tariffs on Mexico for 4 weeks, this following a call with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. What does this mean right now for businesses in the state of U.S.-Mexico trade relations?
You know, I think it's important always to recognize that Mexico is our #1 trade partner. As such, we need to treat the relationship accordingly. I think the president's doing the right thing in pumping the brakes. I think he has sent a very clear message that, you know, there's a new sheriff in town, and rightly so. We've seen already where the tariffs have worked in some regard. You'll recall that President Sheinbaum immediately sent 10,000 troops to the U.S.-Mexico border. That's an example of how these tariffs can work. But I think longer view, longer term, it's really looking at, you know, what is fair for the United States versus Mexico. We recognize the important trade partner they are, never mind the national security implications. But beyond that, it's really how do we find a place where America gets what it needs, and it is a fairer deal than the deal we have now.
To your point, Mexico reporting significant crackdowns on cartels. Is this a sign that the threat of tariffs are working, and what has been the reaction from the Hispanic community close to the border?
You know, I think Hispanic or not, I'm talking to business owners from all over the country, and certainly those along the border states. It is unequivocally in support of what the president is doing relative to cracking down on the cartels. You know, at the United States Hispanic Business Council, we are unequivocally 1,000% behind this president when it comes to the immediate identification and deportation of those who are criminals or we know are here to do us harm. So from that respect, I think the entire American community, all Americans, are supportive of this notion that we've got to stop fentanyl, we've got to stop the cartels, and we needed a president that was going to stand up and play by a different set of rules, frankly, and push a little bit harder. So on that point, I think unequivocally, I think the American people are behind the president on that one.
What do you think prompted the president to pause tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods, and what does it say that they're still leaving those tariffs in place on China?
You know, I'm glad to hear that that relief has not been afforded to the Chinese government. I think it's right to take a second look at our #1 and #2 trade partners, Mexico and Canada. I think it is right to recognize that these are beyond trade and beyond the economic and commercial interests of our nation. Both these countries have been friends of ours for years and years. We share much more than a border. We share our people, we share cultures, we share national security interests. China is a totally different character. China has not been out to do us any good for quite some time, and I think a recognition of that by this president illustrates that he understands that, and he's willing to fight to get I think a better and more kind of equal playing field between us and China. China continues to infringe on our, you know, you name it, on our markets, you know, on our you know, innovation, and it just runs the gamut. So I'm glad to see that he is taking, I think, a bit stronger stance against China because it's necessary.
Now, China has just imposed 15% tariffs on American agriculture products. This happened last time Trump was in office, when the trade war started to escalate, and then the Trump administration at that point in his first term gave some relief to our farmers. You've been here meeting with folks on the Hill. What are you hearing right now in terms of relief for farmers? Will it actually get to that point where you see the Trump administration having to pass some sort of package?
I have, as I mentioned earlier, just today and yesterday, I've had meetings with 12 members, both in Senate and in the House, both sides, Republican and Democrat. Unequivocally, everybody is behind our farmers and ranchers. As you know, my association represents the interests of the agricultural sector. And so I'm delighted to say and hear, both on the right and the left, Republican, Democrat, everybody is staunchly behind our farmers and an understanding of the situation we're putting them in. You know, you look at 30 states, 39 states in this nation, count Mexico as a #1 and #2 trade partner. But China is also an important trade partner for them. All the excess sorghum and grain and corn and so forth is going to China. And conversely, you know, 90% of the rare earth minerals that we import come from China. So, like it or not, we are mingled and intermingled with the Chinese interests. We have to figure out a way to get this, I think, a little bit more on an equal playing field. Having this president, I think, pull all the levers that are necessary to get that done is something that every member that I've talked to is supportive of, Republican or Democrat.
Javier Palomarez, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, my friend.
support for women athletes now coming from an unlikely corner. Here's California Governor Gavin Newsome today sharing his thoughts on a podcast with conservative commentator Charlie Kirk.
I think it's an issue of fairness. I completely agree with you on that. And the way that people talk down to vulnerable communities is an issue that I have a hard time with as well. So both things I can hold in my hand.
Other Democrats have gotten pushback for similar comments, but Newsome expressed the issue has been a very effective one for Republicans. Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.